Hello and welcome to Model Aviation Live. I'm your host, Jay Smith, Executive Editor of Model Aviation and Park Pilot magazines. And today I want to share a few things with you before we bring out our guest. Our guest today is Michael Smith, the Director of the National Model Aviation Museum. But first, I want to share some unfortunate news. I recently found out that one of our columnists, former columnists, passed away, and that is Mark Fadley. He was our helicopter columnist. He wrote for the magazine. He started the year before I did. He began writing for Model Aviation in 2007, and I started in 2008. And he wrote through the end of 2013 for the publication. And if you don't know Mark, he was a super photographer and a great helicopter pilot, and I really enjoyed working with him. And he lived in the Indianapolis area, so he was, fairly local. And I went to eFest with him and JR Indoor and IRCHA, and just a joy to be around. And after he left the magazine, he had his own business, home improvement, like vinyl siding and window business. And that's kind of why he stepped away from the hobby, because his business had picked up so much. And he wanted to spend time with family, and he had his business. So for him, the hobby side, he needed to curtail somewhat. But I would continue to meet him for lunch about halfway between Muncie and Indianapolis, and kept in contact with him. And unfortunately, Mark passed away, and tomorrow will be the service for him in Indianapolis, and there's also going to be a celebration of life. So I wanted to share that information because I'm sure many people have read his column over the years. If you read the magazine from 2007 to 2013, and you can go to the website that you see on the screen for more information if you're in the area, or you want to attend services for him. So let's also talk a little bit about, right now the Nats are going on, which is super exciting. And one of the things that recently took place last week is that Wynn showed up with his book. Wynn Paul showed up with his book, and it's Stunt History. And it is 2 books in a slipcase. And I did just a quick write-up about meeting him, and I did give a quick look through his book. So this will be in the September issue, just kind of an overview of the book to get the information out. So it's 2 volumes. It covers from, I believe it's 1937 to 2014, going off memory. And we actually are selling it in the museum store. So if you are here at AMA and you're interested, you can purchase it right on site, or you can purchase it online through our museum store. So it was really neat to see that. And Bob Hunt, the former editor of Model Aviation and former columnist, he's going to do a very in-depth review of the book. And he's obviously featured in the book. And one thing interesting, too, about the book is Wynn breaks it down yearly. Each chapter is a year. And every year, Wynn picks a airplane that he thinks was most influential for that year. And specifically for Bob Hunt, Bob's airplanes were picked 3 times throughout the length of this book. So 3 different years, Wynn felt that Bob's aircraft was the most influential. So obviously quite a compliment to him, to Bob. So if you're interested in that, check that out when it comes out in the magazine, or you can look on the museum website store and check it out there, or you can see it in person if you're here. Also want to talk about, so the issue that you're currently enjoying has the articles that I was really excited to share about the Battle of Britain. Obviously, we have the article about the models that I worked with Dave Platt, and then I wrote another article about collecting the Battle of Britain. And one of the things I mentioned is I wanted to have a book review about a book about the making of the movie. But unfortunately, the original book is out of print, and it's quite expensive. But I did show the picture of that book, and I mentioned that it is being reprinted with some updates. And my hope was to have had that book review in the magazine. But unfortunately, the book, like often happens, was delayed twice. But the good news is I have it. I got it just this week, and here it is, Battle of Britain, the movie. So in this book, tells all the stories about making the film. There's lots of pictures. Basically, it's a reprint of the original book with a few, additional pieces of information and insight that have come to light since the book was first published. And there is a really good picture that I want to share if we can see it here. There's a really good picture right there That's one of the RC models in color that you can see that was being flown during the film. So if you're interested, this book, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on just about any of the major booksellers. Casemate gave it to us, so please give Casemate a look and support them. They provided the copy so that I could review it. So I'm really excited to read it. And since I did purchase the original book, I'm really excited to read this one and look at the changes and additional photos and just basically what's different about it. So because we're in the Nats right now and we're celebrating the 100 years ago when the Mulvihill Trophy was awarded, I wanted to kind of focus today's show on that because just this week the Mulvihill was awarded. So Michael Smith, our museum director, has amassed a little bit of a backstory and history about the Mulvihill. So Michael, I'm very excited to have you on the show today so we can talk about this.
Well, thanks for having me on the show here. Yeah, there's been a lot of excitement in terms of the 100th anniversary of the very first Mulvihill event. That was in 1923. Um, Great to have a good turnout this year. They had quite a few contestants, and weather couldn't have been better in terms of flying. This whole week, in fact, for the free flight group has been fantastic. But yeah, the event kind of has an interesting kind of twisting history and how it started in relationship to the things that were going on. And that's what we trace our Nats that we have every year now back to. So this is the 100th anniversary of the very first Nats. The 100th Nats, though, will be in 2026. We had a gap during World War II where the Nats were not held. So that's kind of the reason for that gap from this year to 2026. But yeah, it was neat to have the contestants out there. So kind of without further ado, we'll kind of go through some of the interesting background of the history of that. Um, it all actually started in 1915. That was actually when the very first national model airplane contest was held. So, I mean, you keep that in context. I mean, the Wright brothers successfully were flying in 1905. They flew in 1903, but over here in Dayton, they were flying in 1905. So, we have the first model airplane club being formed in 1909. And so by 1915, we have the first national contest. It is for clubs, though, and there are actually 3 events that are held, and the club then sends in their information, their results. The first one, so those 3 are a rise off water, a hand launch, and a rise off ground. And the winning club in 1915 is the Illinois Model Aero Club out of Chicago. They win in 1915, they win again in 1916. The event isn't held in 1917 or 1918. When it's held again in 1919, the Illinois Model Aero Club wins it again. So, as was customary in those days, if you won an event, a trophy 3 years in a row, it was retired to you. So, the Illinois Model Aero Club, IMAC of the day, walks away with the Villard Cup. And while they are very excited about that and recognize how significant that is for their club, the club is also forward thinking enough to realize that without a national contest, there's nothing that's really going to push modelers to develop new airplanes, new designs, use new materials, things like that. So in 1922, the club reaches a point where they think that, or they have ideas in regards to a national event again. So they go to the NAA at the time and they work with them, but it's a kind of a story of a little too short, a little too late to get things happen. So in 1923, they try again. This time they are successful in getting one of the vice presidents of the NAA, Bernard Mulvihill, to agree to put forth the money to have a trophy created. However, just kind of before that, again, things are starting to fall apart. And so the president of the full scale Illinois Aero Club flies 3 of the contestants back to St. Louis, where the 1923 air races are going to be. Uh, They use Charles Dickinson's his airplane, and it's a converted World War I bomber. And they fly the three Model Aero Club members down to St. Louis, and they meet with the Air Race Board. Now, the Air Race Board isn't too sure about this. They've really got a full ticket of races. They're not really sure how they're going to fit a model airplane event in. So things are not necessarily looking good, but the three boys decide to stay overnight and meet with Mr. Shaw, who's actually kind of the contest lead, and they call Mulvihill in Washington, D.C., and he says, yes, I am actually going to put forth money if you put the contest on the event. So through those discussions and with the kids being down there, the decision is made to create event number 6, and that is the Mulvihill Trophy event. It's a duration event. And as part of that, as I said, Mulvihill puts forth the money for a trophy. He actually invites schools along the East Coast to submit design ideas for the trophy. And the first trophy is actually a young boy getting ready to launch an airplane. So this is what they use for their media pieces to begin with. This is what is going to be handed out. But as kind of things further along, the decision is made that they're going to switch, and they actually create the statue of Icarus tying on his wing. They thought that that would be a little more in terms of inspiring what was happening with aviation, striving to achieve success. This is the trophy that was then cast, and this is the trophy that is still awarded today. Every summer as part of the Mulvihill event. It's taken out after the event and handed to the winner. So it's a kind of an amazing piece of history that continues to this day. With the trophy and the approval of Mulvihill, the St. Louis newspapers start to ramp up the advertising for the competition. We have an advertisement here that has the statue in it and a picture of Bernard Mulvihill there. But the other thing that was kind of interesting for this contest is you had to become a member of the Junior Flying League. There's the application there, the Junior Flying League of the National Aeronautic Association. That was your first piece. And then in the next, one of the other advertisements or one of the other stories bringing the contest to the readers was actually the model entry blank. So you had to fill out both of those pieces and get them in to the newspaper in order to enter the race. The other interesting thing that the newspaper also did to promote the event was they ran several articles, and we've got 2 of them here, that showed how to build your airplane. So one of them shows how to carve your propeller, and another one shows how to make the fuselage. So there were quite a few different articles that the newspaper ran to kind of cover those different events. They also posted the official rules for the event. And on top of it, there was also a $100 first prize. And this was a perpetual trophy. So the winner was going to take it home with them until the following year. And then they'd be passed off to the next member. But the rules there, basically, it had to be a rubber band powered model. It was a duration contest, and the total purse for the event was $300, going down to seventh place, who was going to get $10. So the event, then the day of the contest came about, and they had different contingents. This here is the contingent from Detroit. And then we've got a picture here of the group that attended from Chicago. This was actually the Illinois Model Aero Club that had come down for the event. And then we've got a picture of the lineup of all the contestants here before the event. And as an interesting aside, one of the other individuals who was here at this event is pictured over here on the right-hand side. That is Paul Garber, who would go on to acclaim with the National Air and Space Museum and have the Garber facility named after him. But he was an ardent modeler. He was also involved in kites. as well. And he produced a book in 1928 that talked about modeling and things that you could do. And actually, in that book, there's also a plan, which we found out later. I'll talk a little bit about, but there was a plan for the airplane that won this 1923 event. So on that day, they have the contest. The mostly younger kids launch their airplanes, and the first 7 places all go to the members of the Illinois Model Aero Club. So again, with the understanding that the Illinois Model Aero Club had won all the events in 1915, 1916, and 1919, it really wasn't a surprise that they were developing airplanes that were going to be at the top of the level. As an interesting aside, that club was actually formed by William Bushnell Stout, who would go on to acclaim working with Ford, developing Ford Airfield and the Ford Trimotor. So they were in good company in terms of being inspired. What's really neat is we were able to find also in the newspapers a picture of Ed Lange. Here he is pictured with his winning airplane. He had a flight that was 4 minutes, 22 and 3/5 seconds to win, and he won, as I said, the $300, or excuse me, the $100, and he got to take the trophy with him. Really, an amazing event that, like I said, we are excited to be able to continue to this day. Um, for the contest that was this year, as I said, it was beautiful weather out there, and we've got some pictures of some of the contestants launching their Wakefield airplanes. As a kind of another piece to this story, we actually took that book that Garber had written and started to build a reproduction of the winning airplane from 1923. But then we found out that looking at the plan itself, the wingtips and also the cross bracing inside that A-frame did not match the picture of Lange's airplane that he had handing there, or that he was holding on to. So Terry Reno, who is our volunteer who built the airplane, made some modifications and so forth, but we were able to construct a really neat looking airplane that then we were able to have with the winner. And we've got a picture here of Hope. There she is holding her airplane and the reproduction of Lange's 1923 A-frame and the Wakefield trophy right in front of her. Several years ago, we museum volunteers had to extend the base to that second tier of brass plates, but it is something that will be able to be filled up for quite some time now as we look forward to the actual 100th event like I said, in 2026. So that's a real quick run through of kind of the history of that very first event and the creation of the Mulvihill event.
Well, I've got a few questions about that, Michael. And I guess the first one, if you're aware, is when did our museum take possession of the trophy?
I would say I do not know for sure. I would say sometimes when the AMA was in Reston is more than likely when it came into our possession. And we've got it, and we also have the Stout trophies. William Bushnell Stout, again, heavily involved in model aviation, really was an ardent supporter of getting youth involved in model aviation. He saw the benefit of it, and he himself created 2 trophies, an indoor trophy and an outdoor cabin trophy, and those 2 are in the museum as well.
You also mentioned that previously, when the trophy was won, that the person got to take the trophy home with them and kept it for a year. Is that still happening?
No, I do not know myself. Again, I think it was a point when the decision was made to kind of retire the trophy, so to speak, in terms of just not letting it travel. But no, the trophy is taken out on site, and the winner, as was the case here with Hope, the winner has the trophy, all the good pictures and everything. But then the trophy is brought back into the museum and resides here for 364 days out of the year.
So, Michael, since you've been our museum director, have you been the one that's taken it out and been part of the presentation every year?
No, I have done it a few times, but also the National Free Flight Society president oftentimes is the one who comes up and gets it and takes it out on site. And I'm trying to think. I think one year because of weather, they actually had it in the McCullough room, our education room attached to the museum. But generally, it's yeah, they come in, sign the trophy out, and take it out on site. And this time it was a little longer because we took it out in the morning, and was out there during the all of their flying events for that day at the Free Flight Society's tent and registration area. And then we had the award ceremony that about was I think it was 5:30, quarter till 6, give or take. Yeah, there's our current president of the National Free Flight Society, David, with the trophy and hope.
And outside of them handling the trophy, is it like most things in the museum where it's white glove?
Oh yeah, yeah. Anytime that when I took it out there and when I brought it back, yep. Uh, keep uh, keep the gloves on.
I was kind of thinking sort of like the Stanley Cup in a way. We
Yes,
treat it that way.
yes, most definitely. It's the oldest original trophy that's still contested for that we have um, in the museum. It's not our oldest trophy. We actually have a trophy from 1910 in the collection. But yeah, it's the oldest that's still contested for. The other one would be the Wakefield, that obviously is still contested for. That's older than the Mulvihill.
XJet made a comment about early Nats were sponsored by major automakers and were really a big deal in the media. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Plymouth sponsored their own Nats. Um, we had quite a few early nationals that were started or that were supported by American Boy magazine. They sponsored several of them, and actually the winners of those events, the winter indoor and winter outdoor, were those events were held in Detroit. And as soon as the event was over, the kids basically packed their bags who won, boarded a train to the coast, got on a steamer, went over to England, and this was all paid by American Boy magazine. So they got on a steamer, they went to England, they visited the Hawker plant. They got to compete in the Wakefield event over there. We also had the National Playground Association sponsored events, the Nats several years. Trying to think of who some of the other ones. A lot of uh, the Navy obviously was the major sponsor for a long time. We also had fraternal groups and community organizations that helped sponsor and pay for things. And then that also came into play in terms of trophies and whatnot. But like I said, the Plymouth Internats were their own thing. They were not part of the AMA and the NAA Nationals. They were their own thing. That Plymouth dealerships had regional events, and the winners of those regional events then went to Detroit for the Plymouth Internats.
Going back to the Mulvihill for a moment. So, in that picture with Hope, where she's holding the airplane that she won with, and then she's also holding the picture of the reproduction from 100 years ago. I mean, looking at the two aircraft, there's a bit of differences there. So, do you have any thoughts about the evolution, Michael, from 100 years ago to today? Just any kind of an overview of some of the changes that maybe have taken place in the aircraft themselves.
Well, I mean, so much of it has to do with what we now know about aircraft, what we now know about propellers. Um, the amount of rubber that they use in those aircraft is obviously now something that's taken into account too. So, I mean, the biggest thing there is that was really the early days of competition. I mean, they were still dealing with A-frame pushers because they didn't completely understand everything that was going on with torque. Although at that event, there were some tractor airplanes in the picture that we showed earlier of the whole lineup. You can see there's at least one, if not a couple, tractor airplanes in that picture. Um, I know that the Detroit contingent, it was said that while they were test flying, they crashed all their airplanes. So they might have actually been able to do better if that had not happened. Um, so it could be something, obviously, at that time. The A-frame, even though it looks fragile, the A-frame is a pretty strong airplane. Um, and with those airplanes, they were pretty much flying straight line. Um, Prior to the duration events starting to take hold, everything prior to that had been distance events. I mean, when they were beginning a 300 flight, a 600 flight, 600-yard flight, those were big things. And then they were flying a quarter of a mile. So yeah, a lot of evolutionary changes in terms of going from distance to duration itself was a big part of the change in model aviation. And I think obviously now with modern designs like the one Hope has, it's designed in such a fashion that it's going to go for and hunt once it's launched with the circles. If it catches into a thermal, it's going to stay there. The A-frame pusher is a little harder for that to happen.
And the trophy itself has been displayed. We have a special display for it, given at the 100th, just inside. If people visit the museum, just inside, just past the gift shop, on the right hand side. Will the trophy be displayed there, Michael, for the rest of the season?
Yes, it's actually going to be up there through 2026.
Oh,
Um, yeah. So we right now there's an A-frame hanging up above the trophy, and the airplane that Terry just built, the reproduction, that's going to go into that display case as well. Well, not really the case, but into that display as well.
obviously we've touched on recently in the magazine, that there is the ability to take a virtual tour of the museum. But since we're talking Nats and talking about the museum, do you mind sharing just a little bit about other Nats things that people would find in the museum if they visit?
Well, we have one whole exhibit that talks about the Nats itself. It talks about the first 1915 events. We've got a great picture of one of the very first model airplane big contests that actually occurred in England. Uh, A.V. Rowe, who actually won the event with his airplane and took his winnings to build his first man carrying airplane into what became Avro Aviation. That's kind of where we start. We talk about the evolution with the Mulvihill event, and then the Navy taking over in the Navy Nats and everything that was involved with that, and then kind of the unfortunate changeover from the Navy when they pulled back their support, but the strong work that the AMA did to continue the Nats with the first one after that being up at Oshkosh. Um, and then continued to travel it until the Nats ended up here on the AMA's flying site, the IAC here. And then obviously we continue today for the outdoor events. Indoor has traveled around and continues to travel around.
And there's a nice display that tells you, if you look up the year, it tells you where the Nats was held. So that's a really neat thing too.
Yeah, all the different locations. It's obviously when the Navy Nats were going on, it kind of ended up being on 4 different naval bases. But then when the AMA took over, it bounced around to a few more places than just 4. But at the same time, there were some other cities that kind of went along, or I should say, were semi-regular events that we would go back to. But I think one of the problems that I have heard was that while some of the sites were good, some of the sites were not so good, especially as you looked at it being for like free flight or radio control. I mean, you might have a good spot for control line and RC, but free flight would suffer. Um, so I think that all goes back then to obviously being able to have our site here that improvements can be made to it. Yeah, there's a good picture of some of the different things from the collection that we've got out as part of that display. We've got the arrow sign from 1940 in the case that's directly down below that. We've got some great ribbons and pins and so forth from the different events. Um, and then in the collection itself that are not on display, we have some of the pith helmets that the contestants wore during the events. We've got uh, T-shirts, memorabilia, things like that, bumper stickers that were all kept as part of that, as part of the Nats.
One of the things that we could see in the picture of our Nats display is an airplane that was flown for the president. It's just at the top left in that picture. You can just see it in the picture we had on the screen just before that one. You could see it above the case. So whenever I've had to give some tours recently of the museum, and I keep taking people and showing them the aircraft. Could you talk a little bit about that aircraft? Because I think it's pretty neat. That's why it's one of the, if there's a handful of things I like to show people in the museum, that's one of them. So for those that want to check it out on the virtual tour, or if they come and visit the real museum, could you talk, Michael, about that airplane?
Well, that goes back to the national championships that were sponsored by American Boy magazine. And I should mention some of the other memorabilia that we have are trophies. We've got a lot of the different Nats trophies that were presented. Yeah, there's the little airplane there on top. And in that case, while we're looking at it right there, that's right below that airplane are the four significant trophies that traveled around in the early days of the national championships. So in the very back left of that case, we see the Mulvihill of Icarus tying on his wing. Below that is one of the Stout trophies. And then on the right hand side of that is the Moffett that was created in a way to honor Admiral Moffett. He was a big supporter through the Navy of aeromodeling. Unfortunately, he was killed in the dirigible accident. And so the modelers created the Moffett trophy in honor of him. And then below that is another one of the Stout trophies. So in the early days of the Nats, those were the four trophies that everybody was trying to win. And then the airplane above it, as you said, Jay, that is um, the actual airplane that was flown for the president as part of the American Boy magazine um, program or event. The winners were not only taken to Europe, but they were also taken out and they met the president and flew their airplanes. So that is one of those airplanes. I don't know how many. Obviously, they were delicate little free flight airplanes. So to say how many of those even exist to this day, I would say that's probably it. But yeah, that we have not only that airplane, but we have the trophy that he won that year. So those are, I mean, it was a the other thing that I should point out too, I mean, when we were talking about the events themselves, those national championships, those early years, to include even going back to the event I mentioned in 1909 there in England, I mean, they would routinely draw huge volumes of spectators. So it was not only something for the contestants, but it was a giant elaborate program. I mean, for that 1909 event there in England, I think they even had problems holding back the crowds for them to make official flights. And then you look at the early magazine articles or things about the early Nats themselves. I mean, they had huge crowds that were part of the extravaganza.
Yes, I've seen some of those pictures, and it's just incredible. Like you said, hundreds of people, and mostly dressed in suits.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the excuse me, a lot of the contestants were dressed in suits as well. A, definitely a different world. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, like I said, that was the Detroit contingent, I think, if I remember right. I think that's the guys from Detroit. Yep. Yeah. I should also note that of the three people that were flown down to talk to the air race board, Ed Lange was one of those guys who went down. Um, and another famous modeler that people might recognize is Bert Pond. He was also in that picture of the three guys being flown down to St. Louis. That was the model airplane committee that was sent down to meet with the St. Louis Air Race Board.
Well, obviously we're touching on the Nats because the Nats is happening right now. And I definitely want to remind people that we do have the Nats news. It's a blog online that's available to you, to anyone, to follow along with what's going on with the competition. It's the daily report, and as you can see, it's broken out by date. So if you, and by discipline. So if you are interested in something in particular, you can take a look at that. So please check that out. Look at the photos. Look at the articles. They are written by subject matter experts that are out there participating or volunteering with the events. So this is a great source to keep if you're not able to attend the Nats to keep up on the competition. And then of course we're also going to have a complete article about the Nats competition that'll appear in the magazine. So we have people out on site right now doing interviews and photographs of everything that's going on with all the different disciplines. And the Nats runs through next week. Always or typically with the Nats, the last thing we have is helicopter, because then helicopter goes right into IRCHA, so it works out very well. Plus, this year we're having a world competition in helicopters. Michael, so we talked a bit about the trophy, we talked a bit about the Nats, and while you're on the show, I want to give you the opportunity if there's anything you want to mention. I know you've been working on some new displays and working on different things. So is there anything that you would like to mention to viewers about changes to the museum or exhibits?
Certainly. Before we do that, I was wondering if we could bring that other Nats News article back up again that we just showed. There's something there I thought that the viewers might be interested in. So this second picture right here, the gentleman with the green shirt on, just went too far right there. Okay, the gentleman to his right, who's standing there in the kind of checkered shirt, that is Bob Seifleet. Uh, Bob is a very famous aero modeler. He is one of only, I remember right, one of only 3 people to be awarded Nats Grand Champion, because back in the earlier days of Nats, you could compete in several events and gain points. And so instead of just being an event champion, you could actually be the Nats Grand Champion. And Bob Seifleet is one of the few people to actually be Nats Grand Champion 5 times. And we've got his trophies as part of the museum's collection. And we also did an interview of Bob back in well, it's been a while ago, a couple years ago, but as part of the museum's uh, what do I want to say, the museum's interviews. So if you get a chance, definitely go back and we Bob talked about each one of the different years, and we've got the trophies, like I said, of Bob's. We actually had those on display a couple years ago as a one piece. But in terms of the museum, yeah, there's some new exhibits that we are working on, and we're excited to have some new airplanes that we've gotten too. Um, So one of those is the giant scale aerobatics IMAC exhibit. We were able to acquire Kike Somazzini's airplane that he won the Tournament of Champions with when he kind of introduced what we all now call 3D flying. Uh, we were able to actually get that airplane. It was a little bit of an ordeal, but with the great help of Kike and some of his unbelievably fantastic friends, we were able to get that airplane up here and get it on display. Hope to have an article in the magazine at some point where we've got Kike kind of talking about his story and also the story of the airplane. We also were able to acquire the airplane that won the first RC scale contest in 1957. So that's on display. We have the U-2 that won Top Gun in 2020 and 2021. We've got the airplane that placed third in control line at the Scale World Championships that were held here on site in 1992. Those are all part of the scale exhibit that it's taken a little while longer than I had hoped to work on, but that's a new exhibit. And then we've also got Some pieces in our aircraft at work gallery. We have, through the fortunate donation of one of our museum friends, patrons, we have two very large target drones that were used by the U.S. military in the 1990s. And then we also just recently got on loan to us from the company Zipline one of their Sparrow aircraft. This is their delivery airplanes, been used in Africa, in Zimbabwe, for example, to deliver medical supplies. So we've got that airplane suspended in that gallery, as well as one of the delivery boxes under the parachute. So those are all some things that we're excited to have in the museum in terms of recent acquisitions, and get more information and whatnot out on those to our visitors, and a little bit later on, more information on our website.
Well, I think Aircraft at Work is a great name for that display of aircraft. It definitely covers, from target drones to the zip line. And some people may recognize the name Zipline because we actually had an article a few years ago about that, because they were delivering medical supplies and I think even blood
Yes.
to remote regions where it was very difficult to reach from via vehicle or any other means. So there's a whole article that you can look back at in Model Aviation. And there has been some talk about an updated article, because there's a lot that's changed with the company since then. And so definitely look forward to something like that in the future. And as I said, I've been giving a lot of tours in the last few weeks. Right now, we're talking to publishers and printers about about our magazine being printed. So I had some visits, and I've taken people over. And a lot of times I'll ask Michael to give the tours because he's just so knowledgeable. But I have a lot of respect for his knowledge, but I also like giving the tours too, because it's neat to share our excitement with aviation. And the guests that have come are not modelers, and they're always amazed by our museum and all the things that we have there. So there's definitely a lot of new things
Yeah.
that Michael just covered.
Yeah.
That
There's also, I just now remembered too that I don't definitely want to leave out. One of the AMA's new SIGs is drone soccer, and they donated one of the goals, a couple of the prototype soccer balls, and then we also got a soccer ball from the team that won the first drone nationals. So we have that on display as well in our multi-rotor exhibit.
Yeah, lots of new things to see. Obviously, things are getting rotated in and out of the collection. Is there any kind of for you, Michael, in talking about rotating things in the collection? I mean, is there any guideline that you go by? Is it 6 months, a year, 2 years, or is it just kind of what's happening in our hobby, or what kind of drives when you decide to switch things out?
Uh, Part of it is if there's new aircraft offered to us, like Kike's airplane, its size mandated that we had to do something different in order to display it. So that kind of brought about a redesign of the scale aerobatic exhibit. And that was kind of then a domino effect, because in moving that, that allowed us to use some of the pieces that had been part of that display elsewhere for the multi-rotor exhibit. And then as part of that, we moved the scale exhibit. And so we've been able to do some different things in terms of having more space, so we can put more out on display in the different subject matters. In particular, that actually also came into play when we took out our theater. We had the theater in the museum almost from when the headquarters building was built. The AMA, we had a movie called All Because of Model Airplanes. That was a pretty interesting movie. It covered all the disciplines, but it was getting a little old. It didn't have all the subject matter aircraft wise. And so we were also looking at the visitors who went in and watched the movie. And then we also kind of looked at how people consume media today. And generally speaking, you're looking more at a 2 or 3 minute snippet. Uh, People generally aren't going to sit now for 20, 25 minutes and watch a movie or something like that. So we made the decision to completely take out the theater. And so that made a much larger gallery space, which allowed us to move all of the aircraft at work into that space, it actually gave us quite a bit more space. So we were able to bring some additional aircraft out that hadn't been on display for a while. And then it also allowed us the opportunity to put on display the two big Continental target drones, the Frogfoot and the Hind, that we got that previously we would just not been able to do. So those are some of the things in terms of rotation. We also look at like uh, this year being the Mulvihill. So as part of that, we created a new exhibit up front. We pulled the Mulvihill from the display case it had been as part of the Nats exhibit and put it up front. And then on occasion, we also have summer exhibits where we're doing things just during the Nats. Um, we had an exhibit that just looked at all the different pith helmets that we had and how people have decorated their helmets. We also had an exhibit that highlighted Bob Seifleet's trophies that he had won as the Nats Grand Champion. So, yeah, there's a lot of different variations as to why we rotate or when we rotate things around.
Well, it's been great to kind of chat a bit about the history of the Nats, the history of the Mulvihill, talk a little about the museum. Is there anything else, Michael, that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
Well, encourage people to, if they get a chance, to come see the museum for our season. We'll be closing again. Unfortunately, with COVID and everything and what's been happening, we're still kind of limiting our hours to a summer season. So we'll be open through September. So if anybody is happening to go through, I know that a lot of people are on their way to Oshkosh. Stop by the museum on your way up or on your way back down. Come in the museum, throw an airplane in so you can go out on the IAC and go fly and enjoy yourself out there, or come out and attend some of the events like we're going to have, as Jay said, the Helicopter World Champs. We're going to have the Warbird event on Labor Day weekend. So definitely, if you get a chance, come out and see the museum. If not, I really encourage people to go to the museum's virtual tour and kind of walk through, so to speak, and see what we have in the museum.
Perfect. Well, and I also encourage people, if there's anyone that you'd like to see on Model Aviation Live or any topic you'd like to see covered, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments section on here or send me an email. Always interested in bringing on guests and that cover all aspects of aero modeling. Michael, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all the information. I definitely want to point out the next show. It'll be in August, on August 18th. So I hope to see everyone there. And Michael, I think you and I need to go out and enjoy the Nats a little bit before the end of the day.
Yeah, it's definitely been a fantastic week for the free flighters out there. I don't think they could have asked for a better week overall.
Excellent. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see everyone next month.